A young artist who paints pictures in the nude is sent to a monastery because of her character, but she runs away and soon finds herself a model for paintings, but their relationship grows into something more. Watch till the end and subscribe to the channel to promote this video. It is the year in the yard. At first, the action will take place in Great Britain in a large estate, and later the story will move to France. Loud screams of heavy shoes echoed throughout the estate. The girl jumped and ran in hard-to-reach places. Suddenly, an angry voice of a woman sounded. It seemed that she was about 30 years old. She said, "Get down, it's dangerous." The ringing and melodious laugh of a stranger echoed through the walls of the house. Only one voice made one imagine her face full of joy and happiness. And then there was a second angry shout, "Get down, Mrs. Melissa!" Therefore, Lady Melissa, or rather Melissa Charlotte Edighill, was the youngest daughter of Duke Edenhill. It was her loud and resounding laughter that echoed throughout the walls of the estate, and it was this restless girl that they tried to catch and put on a chair. Suddenly, Melissa lost her balance and began to fall from the beam that stretched to the very end of the corridor. The woman firmly grabbed the girl and tried to gently lower her to the ground so that she would not hurt herself. Looking at Melissa, the woman returned the angry and stern controller's gaze and said, "How much longer are you going to act like a child?" Melissa just laughed in response. She couldn't help that laugh that wordlessly washed all the woman's words out of her head like water. Melly said, "Lady, you shouldn't under any circumstances. Oh, did you say a new horse would arrive today?" The woman did not understand what Melly was talking about, so she looked questioningly at the Duke's daughter and exhaled. Suddenly, Melissa broke free from the strong embrace and flew to the exit, trying not to fall and hit her head on the floor from such a high mileage. All the woman managed to say was to shout, "Matey!" But Melissa had already hid behind the turn of the large and spacious door of the estate. This Melissa was still the troublemaker of the estate. Since childhood, she created countless problems and made everyone worry about her. The teachers who agreed to teach Melissa quit their jobs without staying a week at a new workplace next to this brawler. In order to avoid problems, the young girl was sent to a monastery. And instead of a calm and slow study, Melissa only made a scandal with a nun of the monastery. She constantly did things that were not acceptable for the daughter of the Duke himself. Despite everything, she had one exceptional talent, an incredible thirst for art. Each movement on the canvas ultimately resulted in something extremely strange and incomprehensible to the evaluating eye. A man approached Melissa curiously and asked, "Ma'am, what are you drawing?" Melissa only smiled faintly. She was not too emotional while painting, because it was something like a calming meditation in the form of paints on canvas. Suddenly, a maid came into the room together with a woman she knew, and this woman looked at the canvas and shouted, "How can an aristocratic lady paint such obscenities?" However, everything was fine with Melissa. According to those around her, she did what she wanted. The woman continued to shout, "I have nothing more to teach you, madam. You are simply unbearable." Suddenly, a man standing in the aisle grabbed his head and walked forward. He opened the door and asked, "Melissa, can I come in for a minute?" This man turned out to be Melissa's father. He exhaled heavily and said, "I will find you a new, even better teacher right now." Suddenly, the girl interrupted her father and didn't let him finish his thought. Instead, she blurted out, "Father, I want to go to Paris." The man looked at his daughter and asked, "Paris? Why did you say this so suddenly? If you are talking about the fair that will be held, then you can go with your brother as soon as he returns from England. He should be back soon, so you won't have to wait long." Father quietly continued, "However, if you want to go to Paris not for the fair, but to travel..." However, the girl did not let him finish his thought. "No, I want to visit the fair alone," Melissa said in a sharp and cold tone, as if cutting through the air with her sharp response. Proc's father replied, "There's no reason I won't let you go alone to the fair. Problems and troubles can certainly arise." Melissa tried to persuade her father and already began to give various arguments in her favor, trying not to give in to this pressure from her father, but her father was disobedient. He turned his head sternly and said, "I can't." Melissa raised her head indifferently. However, later she lowered it with the same indifference. The father, noticing such an upset reaction of his daughter, decided to support her by taking her hand and saying, "Daughter, don't be upset." The father continued, "You know, it will be difficult to get this far on your own, and you need a minimum of support and someone's control so that I know that everything is fine with you." The girl obediently listened to her father and did not insert her opinion. When Dad finished, Melissa got up from the table and said, "Okay, Dad, I'll go there with my brother instead of alone." In the following days, the father found a new tutor, but even she quit with a lot of shouting. The story continued with all subsequent teachers who came to Melissa. Each could not stand the character of the Duke's daughter and ran away from the estate, never to return. Melissa was lying on the bed in the evening and remembered the words that were said to her always and everywhere. These words annoyed her a little, but over time she got used to it, and in her head she would echo some words. Aristocratic lady, draws such obscenities. This woman has no dignity. Brawler, brawler, gallows. Melissa was annoyed by everything. She did not get better, and on the contrary, her head started to hurt more. The girl thought about the fact that now she would like to see her mother. What would she say if Melissa's mom was here? What would she do? If she was here, what would she accept? The girl began to recall the most vivid memories associated with her mother. Mom asked, "Lisso, they say you took Mom's perfume." And Melissa replied, "Yes, I saw Mom do it. I wanted to be like her, because she is the most beautiful woman on earth, Mom." However, the mother replied, "Lissa, listen, a beautiful woman doesn't care if she looks pretty or not. She does what she wants, then she is truly beautiful. So Lissa, do what you want and how you want." Melissa lifted her head and her mother in fascination. She admired her mother because this woman was the best, most beautiful, and sweetest woman on the planet. There was simply no one better than her. Suddenly, the girl was pulled out of her memories by a conversation outside the door. From the door came familiar voices. Melissa seems still angry. She's still young. She needs to be alone. Getting up from the bed, Melissa ran to the door and heard additional phrases. She's very kind of sensitive. The girl approached the crack and tried to listen to what the people behind the door were talking about. The depressed father's voice broke out. "Anatolievna, I'm so afraid. I'm so worried about her." The father continued, "Every year, she becomes more and more like her mother." Agatha replied, "You love this part of your wife." But the father replied, "Of course I love Melissa too, but I want her to live a normal life." Suddenly, Melissa heard Agatha say, "Don't worry so much, because tomorrow her fiancé will arrive." The girl almost went crazy after hearing this terrible news that turned her life upside down. Melissa didn't want to get married. She didn't want that romance. She didn't want to be apart and belong to some man. What strange methods of taming. Melissa thought it was unnecessary for her. She could not believe that her father decided to do everything against Melissa and against her will. Melissa fussily rummaged in the chest of drawers and almost immediately found the picture she needed. The girl's eyes widened as she looked into her. Melissa and her mother were there. Melissa immediately remembered her mother's words, "Don't listen to anyone, do what you want." Melissa quickly closed the chest of drawers and began to zip it shut. And later, she swallowed the chest of drawers in her throat from the determination to say it out loud. Gathering courage, Melissa said decisively, "Yes, I decide to go to Paris." These words mean more to her than just a desire. Inside, the girl felt an urgent need for this. It was the same day when Melissa began to pack her things and go to the station to go to Paris. A huge train arrived at the station, and Melissa was beaming with joy. Her sudden desire turned into reality, and now she will go on the train to France. The girl soon fell asleep in the carriage and did not even notice how she began to fall into a deep and sound sleep. The knocking of the wagon wheels on the platform quietly startled Melissa, but soon they began to approach the final stop. Suddenly, the girl heard a very loud and high-pitched sound, which indicated the final station of Palissa. The girl slowly opened her eyes and put her head out the window. She saw the platform sparkling clean, but the sun was shining through the glass in the roof, making a beautiful pattern on the ground. The girl got out of the car and put her bag on the floor, surveying the area, which became something completely new for her. The bag was quite heavy, but the heaviness of the bag was secondary to Melissa's euphoria. Melissa's enthusiasm could not be expressed in words. She herself came to Paris, so now she wanted to fly all over France and see where and what her culture is. Having come to the edge of the platform, the girl remembered the words she had learned before going to Paris and said hello to Paris in French. Melissa quickly headed to her studio. It was located not too far from the center and quite sound in terms of the fact that there are shops, pharmacies, and restaurants or cafe bars on the side. Entering the room, Melissa met the owner of this small studio. A stooped woman said, "The water pipes are freezing, so when the time comes, the water may disappear. If it does, put some hot water in the pipes. It should help the pipes freeze." Lissa nodded her head, but said that she understood everything, and later the woman continued, "And what did such a young lady forget in my humble home? Nevertheless, they always put the keys under this vase." After these words, the inclined owner pointed her finger at the small plant, but Melissa was already thinking, "Of course, when I was looking for a studio, I was in a hurry with my choice, but how did this room turn out to be smaller than mine? Only," Melissa thought to herself, "let's just say I'm a minimalist. Well, expect this room to be 3 times smaller than mine, since I picked it out in a hurry, and I didn't take anything out of it. But I did rob my dad's safe and take money out of it for a certain living in Paris." The girl looked around the apartment and walked around the kitchen and the room, and then she said, "It's lucky that at least the windows are big, because I ran away from home to paint, so now I have to paint my best picture and shock absolutely everyone in Paris with it." Taking out a huge canvas, Melissa shouted, "Well, I'm a genius!" After several days of effort, Melissa fell to her knees without strength. There was a terrible gloom in the girl's eyes, which showed how weak and tired Melissa was. The girl, sitting on a chair, alone in an unfamiliar place, said, "I'm a loser. I can't think of anything. I ran away because I was angry, and I don't have any plan of action at all. I left my native country only on emotions in order to show my independence, but it looks like I made a big mistake by deciding to run away." But suddenly, Melissa decided that she shouldn't be disappointed if she still doesn't get anything. Maybe she just hasn't reached that moment when her inspiration will take over her, and wrapped in his strong arms until the end of her painting in Paris. Lissa grabbed her coat and hat and ran outside saying, "Right, I don't have comfortable circumstances yet. I need to get used to Paris." The girl decided to take a walk and clear her mind. It seems that the new streets were very confusing for her, but she had to get used to them. It was quite a clear day outside. Many people were passing by the streets. Melissa went into one of the alleys. It was so dark and damp, but there was something aesthetic and mesmerizing about it. Suddenly, Melissa began to look at all the people around her, what they were wearing, how they were acting, but she couldn't focus. It seemed to her that all eyes were directed at her. The men smoked a cigarette one after another, and others simply burned a hole in the girl with their staring eyes. Melissa tried to convince herself that all this was just a dream, and she decided to run as fast as possible to the end of the street and walk into the light. Suddenly, Melissa felt that 2 strangers were following her. They were as if calm, but kept their eyes on the girl. Melissa quickened her pace, trying to get away from the strangers and secure herself. The pace was also quickened by the men walking behind. Lissa didn't show that she was scared, but inside she felt so terrible and was enveloped in fear. She still didn't think that these men were really following her and chasing her. Melissa did not know what to do in such cases, because she was always under surveillance, so no one needed to harass her in her native country. Suddenly, Melissa ran with all speed to the end of the street in search of help or a crowded place. Seeing the corner, the girl decided to hide behind it and wait for the strangers to stop searching. The girl's breathing was so intermittent and restless that it seemed to her that the whole city could hear her. In the end, the girl put her hands down and heard strangers say, "Didn't you see the bullet? Did she run? And she's not as stupid as we thought." Exhaling and catching her breath, Melissa raised her head to look around. However, as soon as she leaned against the wall, she immediately flew downstairs. Melissa didn't expect to see a door there, so she shouted, "You have to hurry! Hurry up!" Melissa almost fainted from fear. The girl flew straight to the ground, the cap to one side and Melissa to the other. A heavy rumble spread throughout the room. Melissa began to gasp in shock. She didn't expect to see a door to a room here, because it looked like a wall. The girl rubbed her head, then shook herself, examining her body. And then, glancing at the dairy through which she flew, she said, "Oh my God, I didn't notice the door. Was it really there?" Melissa started to rise and said, "This is really annoying." Suddenly, Melissa decided to examine the room she suddenly entered and gasped in surprise. Noticing the worried face of the stranger, Melissa froze in place. A naked bachelor, who looked like he had just come out of the shower, was standing in the doorway of the room and looking at Melissa like something alien and not human. The girl shouted to the whole house, "Goddess!" But after a second, she fell silent, because she understood that shouting is not the best solution in this situation. She was shocked by the size of the house and the man standing in front of her. Eventually, Melissa couldn't help but scream out of shock, and the realization that a huge naked stranger was standing before her, in an unfamiliar country with an unfamiliar language. The man repeated Melissa's reaction. He did not expect that some stranger would fly into his room and start screaming. Suddenly, the voices of the same 2 pursuers were heard behind the door. They were standing right behind the door, and one of them said, "Where did she go?" "Oh, we haven't had it for a long time." However, The stranger angrily looked around and listened to the conversation of the two unknown men and immediately understood everything. He grabbed the girl's hand sharply, which made Melissa gasp and looked at the man in confusion. During such an attraction, the girl shouted, "Please wait! Wait a minute, I'll explain everything to you now." However, she did not have time to finish the conversation because the stranger pressed her to his chest and covered her mouth with his hand so that Melissa could not ask questions or say anything at all. Later, the naked stranger stretched his head a little with fear, looking at something behind the door. The two men continued to say, "She's small but nimble. Mishimo, maybe she's here." The other man answered, "No, she's not here, Diego. To hell with her. Let's go back." "Of course, Grandpa. It's a shame they let such a beauty in." Listening to all this, Melissa steadily held on to the arms of the strong, naked stranger and waited for him to let her go. As soon as he did it, Melissa began to swallow air greedily and gasped from the rapid heartbeat in her chest. The stranger looked shocked at the girl, who was breathing so hard that he almost choked her, and later began apologizing, trying to atone for his guilt. Melissa said, "I'm sorry, but I touched," realizing what he was talking about. The man wrapped a towel around his waist and proudly turned his head away. Melissa normalized her breathing and was able to stay in a state of calm. She took the stranger's hand and apologized, as if preparing her husband for what she wanted to say to him now. Looking with enchanted eyes at the man, the girl enthusiastically said, "I'm sorry for such a question, but would you like to be my model?" The man almost collapsed from such news. He did not understand him at all when Melissa asked him about this while he was standing naked in front of her. The stranger began to say something, and Melissa wanted to hear only a positive response to her proposal. However, in exchange, I received only you. You are a crazy stranger who flew into my estate. The guy began to ask how the girl got here in the first place. Did she not notice the door and the big sign at the entrance? However, suddenly, his attention was drawn to the underwear on the girl's blouse. It seems that it reminded him of something, and he got angry because of it. He grabbed the girl by the clothes and threw her out of the house. Still full of hope, the girl turned to the stranger and asked, "But you are going to agree, aren't you?" A second later, a large jacket flew at the girl, directly on the girl's head, preventing her from finishing her question. But Melissa said in a good tone, "Thank you for the jacket. I can wear it, right?" Melissa continued, "I will wear it neatly and make sure to return it clean." The man closed the door right in front of the girl's face and stood for some time holding the door with his hands, as if trying to protect his home from another sudden fall into his room. The guy didn't immediately understand what happened, who this woman was, and what she forgot in his damn house. At first, the guy thought that the stranger was just nonsense. But Melissa ran after the man almost every day and looked for him around the city again and again, offering him to be her model. The guy was saying to himself, "That crazy woman's nonsense turned out to be really true." The stranger ran away every time he saw Melissa again. He ran to the end of the street in fear, moved from one cafe to another, and generally avoided the stranger, remembering the moment they met. It was cold outside. The man stood yawning, warming himself in his warm clothes. His red cheeks betrayed his sense of coldness, and the chattering of his teeth was quite loud, so some people turned to the man smiling and nodding in understanding. Suddenly, something caught the man's attention, and he turned his head in the direction of the exit. Melissa was standing there. The stranger immediately recognized the girl who had been following him for a long time. Smiling, Lissa peeked over the wall and greeted the man. To some extent, it seemed as if she had stalked him and made herself a favorite. The man said, "I told you a long time ago that I won't be your model. I won't do it." And Melissa replied, "Oh no, I am here today as a client." The girl approached the cash register and handed the stranger money. The man smiled and said, In the morning? You are the first person to visit me today. You seem very persistent, don't you?" Melissa smiled warmly and began drinking the drink she had just bought. Suddenly, Melissa got an expression on her face as if she remembered something and decided to tell her husband about it. Smiling with all 32 teeth, Melissa happily said, "What's the point of becoming my model? You guessed it, I'm very persistent. The drawing classes will last for 2 hours for 2 weeks. Write if you need me, and of course it's a great paying job." Melissa brought her husband to a comfortable cafe, opened the book, and the husband looked surprised at the envelope that Melissa had prepared and asked, "Oh, have you prepared a contract?" He was not very surprised, but all this is so official that he is sitting in the court itself and signing important documents. Melissa replied, "Of course I did. From the point of view of the basics, the male line should be legitimized. so later they moved to payment. Melissa replied, "Oh, sure, I totally forgot about the payment. I'll get the letter in a second." She handed the man a piece of paper with numbers and said, "Here, is this amount going to suit you? I'm not very good at modeling salaries. If you're not satisfied with this amount, we can discuss and come to an agreement." The man's eyes nearly popped out of his forehead from the number of zeros at the end of the number. He looked at Melissa and thought to himself, "This amount is even more than my annual salary. What does this woman even do? Where did she get so much money to pay for some painting?" The boy did not think long and decided to agree. With this money, he could send all those children to school. It was too much for him, but he did not argue. He held out his hand and introduced himself. "My name is David Beelan." Melissa smiled and replied, "Melissa Charlotte Edenhill. I hope for our further cooperation." Arriving at the indicated address, the man examined the windows of his future employer, overgrown with grass and vines. For some time, David caught his breath at the door, trying to think of something to say at the meeting. David walked over to the door and jabbed at the doorknob, thinking to himself, "I agreed to this, but I've never modeled before, and I've never even posed. What am I supposed to be doing there? Just stand still? Is it possible to change poses? Shall I talk to Melissa while she paints me?" After looking at his outfit, David said, "What's more? What are you wearing, David? Fool, you need to make a good impression on yourself." David calmed down and continued, "She's quite a young girl, so she can make me do weird things." After knocking on the door, Charlotte happily opened it and said, "Oh, hello, are you here early? Please go into the room. Go ahead, I'll come right now." Ushering her new model into the room, the girl gestured to the room and said, "I've prepared everything we'll need. You can make yourself at home." Melissa examined the man from head to toe. She didn't say anything. She didn't care what her model was examined in. They exchanged glances in silence, but David began to get even more nervous from this river silence, despite the fact that he was already feeling a little at ease. Suddenly, Charlotte sat down behind the canvas and said, "Yaya, why are you standing? Undress David." The man's eyes almost popped out of their sockets from such news. He just remained silent, and the only thing he could squeeze out was the sound of exhalation. Melissa seemed to notice the man's confused reaction and said, "Everything was written in the contract. Penny needs a nude model. I don't have a dressing room, so you can undress right here on the mat." David yelled, "Need to undress? Why didn't you warn me about this right away? Aren't you ashamed?" Melissa, no less surprised than Davide, answered, "First of all, why are you shouting like that? Gave you enough time to read the contract, didn't I? And secondly, why should I be ashamed?" David yelled, "You're a woman, Melissa! Have an ounce of shame!" Melissa replied, "Oh, I almost forgot. I can't see naked men, so I'm just going to copy other people's work? What a shame to even think about it. I will never be able to get married. In fact, I want to become a modern Michelina Vautier. You look great in a jacket, but you will look even better without it." Having driven the boy into another room to change his clothes, she wiped the sweat from her forehead with her hand and exhaled. Later, the girl heard the man's voice behind her. "Okay, I undressed." He was wrapped only in a towel. This towel looked like the only thing left of the man's clothes. He got into a certain pose and said, "But you don't have to throw everything away, huh? So which pose should I choose? Is it possible to stand with your back like this?" The girl opened her mouth in surprise. Melissa poked her finger at the canvas and replied, "Wait, I've already drawn a pose." David asked, "Isn't this a picture of the birth of Venus? Sandro Botticelli, this pose is unique, isn't it?" Melissa replied, "I've heard that many times, by the way. How do you know you took drawing lessons?" Melissa talked to David and painted his naked body, transferring the strong structure to the canvas. Melissa was not distracted from work. She only occasionally looked at the boy and compared whether the picture corresponds to her real view. David didn't complain. It was quite uncomfortable for him to lie naked on the bed, but the salary was high, so he just wanted to lie down for 2 hours and go home. David noticed that the girl was very focused on her painting. Everything was much more serious than the boy assumed when signing the contract in a restaurant. David thought to himself, "She is so focused, but it's like she has a core inside her. I felt it even when we first met. She has a great posture and the water is very elegant. If she has so much money, then she must be a foreign noble lady." David continued thinking, "However, her eyes look so innocent when she's drawing. I used to have eyes like that too. I long to draw too." David really wanted to be the same popular artist, to have fans, but all he wanted to do was take them to the studio. But no one wanted to see David there. He was always chased away and forced to leave the studio without being given the opportunity to study. David's desire to paint gradually faded, and he eventually resigned himself to his eventual failure as an artist. Melissa suddenly noticed that she began to make more efforts to see the picture, and later realized that it was getting dark outside. She looked away from the painting and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Shall we stop for today? It's already getting dark outside, so you should go home." David got out of bed and went to change. Melissa thanked him for his work and complimented him, and David replied, "You did a good job too." In fact, it was so. The guy only needed money, and Melissa was ready to give everything to paint what she really wanted and loved. In general, it was not worth thinking about it anymore. It caused a bad impression on David. Melissa reached for the top, as if she had woken up from a deep sleep. The man handed the girl a blanket, and Melissa did not immediately notice it, but she thanked the man for such attentiveness. Suddenly, she covered her mouth with her hands and said, "Oh, I made a mistake. I was careless and acted like that. I'm at home. I was careless and acted like I was at home." The girl repeated this phrase once more, but more quietly, as if trying to accept this fact on your own. After examining the girl, David asked for payment for this day of posing, because he had to go home. Melissa replied, "Oh yeah, wait a minute, I'll get you some money now." Melissa thought for a second that David had taken offense at her, but she decided not to bring up the subject, so she just walked the man out and told him to be careful on his way home. She met Davido's eyes once more, and the boy turned in the direction of his house. Melissa wanted to do everything well, but it was a complete failure in her opinion. Melissa looked at the sky, from which bright snowflakes were falling. Melissa's incredibly beautiful velvet eyes continued to look at the snowflakes, the girl thought. The girl suddenly said, "Oh, if you think about it, soon Christmas will come, so you need to prepare for this holiday." In the room, the girl hung beautiful balls on the Christmas tree. There were the most red ones. Maybe they simply fit best into the Christmas tree concept. Polissa also associated the new year with art. Lissa put a big star on the mountain. Sometimes she hummed quietly, humming a New Year's song. When everything was finished, the girl examined Lulinka and shouted, "Done!" Afterwards, she smiled even more and said, "Christmas Eve would have been perfect if the pipe hadn't burst." At this time, the father, older brother, and his partner must have been preparing a grand party in honor of the new year. Melissa thought to herself, Are they living a good life without me? Are they waiting for my return? And what about David?" After that little incident, the man put all the dots on the I's and drew a clear border. The girl could not understand why David's attention is so important to her, and why she is so worried about the fact that she could offend him if he is just a model. Melissa said, "However, I just want to get closer to him, get to know him better. Or do I need a special approach to him maybe? Probably, he considers me a rather rude and tactless person." Melissa stared at the burning fire, trying to keep warm in her warm mittens and hat while it was the only source of heat, so Melissa spent most of her hours right by the fireplace. She was a little lonely, as if everyone had left her. Melissa felt so depressed for the first time. She sat completely alone in the room, and only the warm fireplace warmed not only her body, but also her soul. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Expecting someone like her father or relatives, Melissa turned around with a smile. Hearing her name, Melissa screamed. She was so glad to see someone on such a lonely evening, and she was glad for anyone after such a depressing moment. However, suddenly she did not see her father, not even a relative. She saw David. She looked at him confused and asked, "Hi David, why did you come here?" David looked down and said, "A huge fire broke out in the church. All the men of the village volunteered to put it out, but it seems the fire will not subside soon. I have to help them." Melissa raised her hands to her mouth in surprise and horror at the same time. David balled his hands into fists and tensed, as if he was embarrassed to ask the girl for help. The boy continued, "However, in my house, the children are left alone, and the youngest has caught a fever. Now I can't find anyone to take care of them, so—" Before he could finish his sentence, Melissa took his hands and said, "I'll help you." She looked him straight in the eyes and continued, "The most important goal right now is to save people." Melissa then said that she would sit with the children and help, and David needed to help pay off the church. David answered, "Thank you." Such short words were like medicine for Melissa's lonely soul. She immediately felt warm and calm inside, like at home. Melissa quickly took everything she needed and ran outside in search of the house she needed. She knew what to expect, so she was not afraid. But still, there was a certain anxiety inside her. that part of her intuition that always told her to be careful. Without thinking long, after checking the number of the house with the number that David wrote on the note, Melissa ran to the door and, taking a deep breath, knocked and began to wait for an answer. Children's and quick steps were heard in the house. Someone shuffled his feet on the floor, running to the door. A girl with brown hair opened the door and, seeing a stranger on the threshold, asked, "Who is here? Who are you?" Melissa immediately found a lot of similarities between David and his sister. She compared them like drops of water, but later said, "Hi, yeah, your big brother asked me to come and look after you. He's worried about your safety too. You're Chloe, aren't you?" The girl smiled and immediately knew that Melissa could be trusted. She led her into the room, and Melissa began to look around the room. She saw a lot of dirty dishes on the table, and the house in general was not as tidy as she imagined it in her head. At first, the girl only looked around the house, but this was enough to understand the conditions in which the children live. Chloe walked into the room and pointed to her brother with her hand. Lowering her head, she said, "Our younger brother just fell asleep. He's a little sick, so don't worry about it." The girl went further and said, "I heard that there is a big fire in the church now, and my brother ran to help." Chloe turned around and asked, "Oh, sure. What's your name, ma'am?" Melissa realized she hadn't even introduced herself to the little girl. Lissa looked away from the mess in the kitchen and her brother in the room and turned to Chloe, saying, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Melissa, by the way. Chloe, you already had dinner." The girl replied, "I haven't had dinner yet." Then Melissa took out a small cardboard package from behind her back and said, "Okay, I brought some food with me just in case. If you don't mind, you could eat with me. How about that idea?" Chloe immediately agreed. She was hungry, so she didn't think about it for long. A few minutes later, the bowl was empty, and Chloe happily ran to her brother's room. Melissa touched the sick boy's forehead. She didn't wake him up and spoke very quietly. Chloe sat on the side and asked, "Where are you from, lady? From your appearance, it is clear that you are not from France." Melissa quietly replied, "I came from England." Chloe looked at Melissa in fascination and said, "Wow, my older brother also wanted to go to England. He said there are a lot of amazing works of art there." Melissa asked again, "Wait, your older brother?" Chloe smiled and replied, "Yes, that's why he told me to marry an Englishman, even if that man turned out to be like the worst potato in the world." Melissa laughed. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back the laughter and the feeling of kindness around her. Melissa remembered David telling her a little about his art studies. It was cute that he told his sisters about it. Chloe suddenly said, "Oh lady, are you like my brother?" Lissa did not immediately understand what Chloe meant, but the girl sharply grabbed her hand and dragged her behind her. The girl nearly fell trying to keep up with the fast and agile Chloe. Melissa yelled, "Where are you taking me, Chloe? But what's the matter with you?" Suddenly, the girl ran to the table and put her hand on several sheets of paper on which something was drawn. Melissa ran after Chloe and looked at the drawings that the little girl was showing her. The first picture was of ships in the sea. Melissa was pleasantly surprised, but she also couldn't immediately believe that it was drawn by a human hand. Chloe suddenly said, "These pictures were drawn by my brother. Here are some more. Extraordinary, isn't it?" Melissa undoubtedly agreed with the girl's words. She understood that these were simply incredible skills. Everything was so detailed. This is where David's meticulousness begins. Melissa asked, "He's really confident in his moves and incredibly skilled, but why?" Before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by Chloe, who quietly replied, "David stopped painting after our parents died." The girl sadly continued, "We had no other relatives, so my brother had to take full responsibility for his younger brother and sister. Then he decided to leave school to at least somehow work and provide for our family." Tears almost appeared on Chloe's face. The girl felt a longing for a carefree life with her parents, but she understood that this life was necessary. All she wanted was for her brother to be able to paint carefree again. Suddenly, the girls heard Elena's loud wheezing and coughing. He was sick and seemed to be even worse than before. Melissa ran to the boy and began to analyze the situation. He was incredibly hot. His forehead was almost on fire, and Melissa immediately realized that everything had just gotten worse. Melissa looked at Chloe and shouted, "Chloe, bring more towels and warm water." The girl ran to the kitchen without question. Lissa had to pull herself together. She took a deep breath and exhaled and then said, "You have to pull yourself together. I'm the only one who can help him. Pull yourself together." It was morning in the yard, and light was coming through the crack in the door. David slowly walked into the room and looked around it. His gaze slowly traveled down the center of the room and stopped there. Melissa was lying motionless on the bed. Next to her was David's brother, who had recently been burning with fever from illness, and Chloe was nearby. Melissa was so sweet and calm while she slept, like a little baby. David went to his brother and put his hand on his forehead. When he felt a normal low temperature, he realized that the temperature had gone down, and the heat was gone. Afterwards, he put his hand on Melissa's shoulder and said, "Melissa, I'm here. Please wake up." The sleepy girl looked David over from head to toe, and after rubbing both eyes trying to get rid of her tiredness, said, "Oh, David, are you home yet?" Her voice was so quiet and sleepy, as if she was ready to fall asleep again. Melissa continued to say, "Elena is no longer feverish, and I've also fed and put Chloe to bed, but the worst is over, so don't worry." David listened to the girl without interrupting her silence and marveled at her devotion. He took off his hat and said, "Melissa, I am truly grateful." Melissa shook her head, but David continued, "I guess I've been misunderstanding you all this time. Don't think I've been avoiding you out of hate." David wanted to apologize to Melissa and started saying, "I'd like to apologize if I hurt your feelings." However, instead of words, Melissa held out her hands to the boy and silently hugged him tightly, holding him close to her. Afterwards, she quietly muttered, "Merry Christmas to you, David." The guy looked at Melissa in shock. He thought that he had offended her, or that she just hated him and was helping out of pity. However, his face immediately changed. His calm expression was palpable to Melissa, and she also smiled harder. David murmured back to Melissa, "Merry Christmas." Melissa continued to work and collaborate with David, pay him for his modeling work, and generally maintain a good working relationship with him, until one day they finished work, and Melissa said, "David, I'm running to the paint store. Don't wait for me and go home, okay?" David walked up to the girl and touched her hand, trying to stop her, saying, "Oh, Melissa, wait a minute." However, this touch made Melissa's hair stand on end. She was so excited and shouted, "I'll be back soon!" Through. She ran out of the house for a few seconds, and her trail was already gone. At the pass, the guy shouted, "Wallet! You forgot Melissa's wallet, so you should take it." David recently ran into some problems. It's been 4 months since he's been working as a nude model. The guy understood that even under the threat of death, Melissa would never talk about herself. He thought, "Let's let her reluctance go, but this lady doesn't even say anything about her painting. It looks like she's hiding something very carefully." However, the question was what exactly Melissa was hiding from David, and whether she wanted to tell about it in the future. Anyway, he got up from his chair to stretch, but he thought again, "We eat with her, we walk in the forest, but I don't know if I should study myself. Are all artists like that?" Strange thoughts crept into his head, as if David was not as good as Melissa would like him to be. Anyway, he needed to stop thinking about it. Melissa was too good a person to do something horrible behind David's back. Everyone has their own boundaries, and David didn't want to violate Melissa's. Suddenly, he looked at the floor and saw a wallet that had fallen to the floor, so brown and seemed to be quite full of bills. Melissa ran into the room and said, "Yo, I completely forgot my wallet somewhere in the room. It's so dark and small, haven't you seen it somewhere by any chance?" Suddenly, she stopped in place and saw that David was looking at a picture on the mantelpiece. There were several pictures and several candles, but it was one picture that caught his attention, and Melissa immediately understood what the problem was. David stood silently for a while. Those minutes of tormenting the girl were like salt in the wound. Later, this uncomfortable pause ended, and the man said, "Did you want to present your painting at that exhibition, at the same exhibition in Paris, without telling me anything?" Melissa was shocked that David found out about everything. She wanted to keep it a secret, but she couldn't. The girl started to make excuses, but David interrupted her with a shout and said, "Did you want to sell someone a canvas with a naked body on it? At the exhibition? Just to amaze people?" The man's eyes became as if wild. He went mad quietly. As if with a quiet insult, he said, "But who do you think you are to do such a thing? A man's naked body painted by a woman. Won't they condemn and expel you?" David continued, "I now understand why you've been secretly approaching me. Do you know how many points women's bodies get at the show every year?" Melissa started to get angry. She raised her index finger to give David a shut up sign and yelled, "This is art!" But David replied, "Even if it is art, does a gentleman's body have anything to do with it?" Melissa shouted, "Yes, but you don't even remotely remind me of a gentleman, David." The man jumped up in shock, grabbing onto Melissa's head. He grabbed the white canvas and shouted, "I should have guessed right away as soon as you asked me to pose like this." Suddenly, David pulled the white canopy in the painting, and Melissa wanted to stop him but did not have time. She turned to her work in shock, as if she had seen it for the first time. Such a reaction to the unexpected revelation of her skills. Dead silence remained in the room for some time. No one said a word. Only their eyes were fixed on the picture drawn by Melissa. David silently examined the picture, and without saying a word, tightened the blanket that wrapped the picture tighter. Later, he broke this dead silence by distinguishing his words like thin air. "Which? Is that how you see me?" David continued to stare at the picture in shock, pausing between each word, looking at that. "Are you making fun of me?" Melissa lowered her head, realizing that her efforts had just been trampled like a dirty piece of dirt on the ground. Melissa said, "My creativity is not a joke to you." David smiled and said, "Stop messing around with those stupid pictures. If you think drawing is a game, then you better calm down." Melissa asked quietly, "What do you even know?" She said it so quietly, as if in her thoughts, but David questioned, What did you just say?" Melissa screamed at the man and said, "What do you even know? What can you know?" She pushed him, punching him directly in the chest and plunging on the man with her whole body. David began to fall rapidly. He tried to grab onto something but could not. Therefore, with a loud crash, he fell to the ground together with Melissa, trying to catch his breath. David felt a sharp pain in his chest and a nagging tingling in his back. So David lay for a while as if unconscious on the floor, rolling his eyes. His gaze was so greedy that Melissa became agitated for a few seconds. After looking at him and making sure that he was all right, Melissa rose to her arms. She said wistfully, "I never thought of drawing as delusional." Tears fell from her eyes, and the girl couldn't help it. She closed her eyes and said, "But everyone said it was nonsense. They all called it delusional and called me a boy." David silently listened to the girl without interrupting, lying on the floor and taking deep breaths to reduce the pain. Melissa got up and sat between her husband's knees and continued to pour out her soul to David. She continued to sob and said, "You know what's most disappointing? Since everyone started telling me how ill-mannered and horrible I am, I really started to believe it." Melissa continued, "However, imagine how I felt when I heard that from you now." David silently extended his hand to the girl. He didn't say anything at first, but then he began to speak quietly. His gaze was fixed on Melissa, and he quietly said, "Lies. Everything I told you is a lie. You are the most beautiful girl I have ever met." He began to list her gentle and cute qualities that the girl definitely had. David slowly pulled the girl to him and began to soothe her with gentle words. He said, "You are very gentle, more confident than anyone else, an incredible woman. I'm sorry I really blurted out too much." It was quite quiet in the room. There were no such screams and scandals that filled the entire space of this small room until recently. It seems as if the whole street heard their scandal. The picture was no longer on the table. It was somewhere on the floor, but no one touched it anymore because everyone was not interested in it. David pulled the girl to him and put his arm around her to comfort her. He whispered softly in her ear, "I misjudged you, and I should have listened to the person across from me first. Please don't cry, Melissa." He pulled her even tighter and kissed her nose, slowly pulling back, but it was a nice pull, as if it hinted at something to come. Melissa rested her hands on David's chest, but it was as if she looked directly into his eyes. His gaze was so soft and calm. It was as if he calmed her with just a blink of his eyes. Suddenly, the girl wrapped both arms around the man's neck, and David just had time to comment, "Always Melis." Without agreeing, Melissa sharply and economically pulled David to her and kissed him firmly on the lips. David's hands were numb with shock. He didn't know where to put them or what to do, because it was the first time he had felt anything like this. Melissa was biting her man's lips. She was smiling, and David could feel it, as if he was mentally trying to smile with the girl. Suddenly, she quickly jumped away from the man, looking at his facial expression in shock, not understanding what had just happened. The man approached the girl and asked, Melissa, who taught you to kiss like that?" However, the girl laughed and said, "Well, honestly, it was my first time, so I'm not very good at this stuff." Then the girl slowly took the man by the chin and said, "Don't worry so much, David, so take it easy. Close your eyes." Melissa gave directions, but generally David did everything himself. From time to time, Melissa used her fingers to guide David's lips to hers, trying to make him understand what to do. David was trying to grab onto something, but he was lying on the floor. Wait, lying on the floor? Yes. Melissa knocked the boy to the floor and continued to kiss him. Then David caught the passion, so they both proceeded to kiss. There was so little space between them, As if they wanted to be even closer than they were now, they passionately exchanged kisses without letting go of each other. Their eyes crossed from time to time, when Melissa already began to choke from this desire to kiss with David. Eventually, she pulled away from him, and her hand slid down his body before slowly skimming past the belt. Melissa deftly caught his hand and looked into David's eyes. The man grabbed the girl's hand in shock, looking at her. Realizing what Melissa was going for, David decided to change the subject. He angrily said, "I was so excited for you today. Only you would know," Melissa replied. "Didn't you mean it?" After that passionate kiss, David started talking to Melissa, trying to get out of the situation and to be convinced that this is what Melissa really wants. Melissa looked fascinated and looked at David, who looked indifferently at Melissa, but only David himself felt that his face began to fill with blush and redden. Melissa leaned over and said, "Well, don't look like that. Look at me. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this day." David continued to shy away from any of Melissa's hints. His face was already completely red, sweat dripping down his face, and the thoughts of what might happen both attracted and repelled him at the same time. David looked at the girl's bare breasts and awkwardly said, "Button please." Unable to stand it, he grabbed the girl by the legs and turned her over. After a while, the corset and all of Melissa's clothes were lying on the floor. Passion flared up between David and Melissa. With every second, their closeness grew. Melissa looked at David in shock. She felt something she had never felt before and couldn't imagine. With every breath she took, her breathing became more frequent, and her thoughts strayed from the point and mingled in a sea of pleasure. She exchanged glances with David from time to time. The guy just smiled and muttered something under his breath, then continued. Suddenly, he stopped and asked Melissa, "What's more interesting? Do you have something in mind?" Hiccuping, David looked so exhausted, but his face was filled with satisfaction. David suddenly smiled, and later he said, "Come to think of it, Melissa, you were going for it from the very beginning, right?" David continued. "So you asked me to pose for you after you saw me naked? Is that why you got close to me?" Melissa listened silently to David and some of his thoughts. The girl only mocked him, and some she took for granted. Sad David asked, "What's so funny?" Melissa answered, "My paintings, the embodiment of my desires, and you became the muse for them, David. You became the person I wanted to paint." Melissa was tired of being no less happy than David himself. She smiled and said, "You were sure I had some ulterior motives, right?" Melissa was casually talking to David, oblivious to everything else. She bit her lip and smiled, and then said, "Looking at your body every day, do you know what I dreamed and thought about every day?" David smiled and said, "Don't worry, Melissa, I got it all." Melissa collapsed onto David's body. She looked tired and defenseless as well, so she just hugged her husband, and David said, "I understand you, so slow down a bit, okay? Otherwise, you will fall without strength." Melissa kept looking at David with her bright green eyes. She was talking to him, yelling, and expletives from time to time. The blush continued to redden on David's face. He didn't know what to say or answer, so he remained silent for a while. Melissa screamed, but it wasn't a scream of pain or hurt, quite the opposite. David smiled. It seems that this is exactly the reaction he expected. The passion grew even more with time. There was something like an obsession between them. Their bodies were so close to each other as if they wanted to become one. They touched, caressed, and kissed each other while hugging and talking. David was hovering over the girl, his breath painting the girl's skin. Her playful neck began to beat in small yeast. It seems that David is already used to this feeling. He was just enjoying the moment, feeling that each such moment is becoming more and more familiar and natural for him. He calmly experienced every second, skillfully feeling every little shade of it. Melissa, who was standing here as if dug in, suddenly let out an unexpected exclamation from her mouth, which echoed in the space of the room. Her voice, this time, burst from the depths of her soul, louder than ever, sounding like thunder in a clear sky. However, the commotion she had caused quickly caused her to muffle her own words, raising a hand sharply to her lips in an attempt to stifle her own exclamation, as if trying to hold back the whirlwind of emotions raging in her soul from letting them out. David stood at the top of the room, watching Melissa, who was on the bed below. His gaze pierced the space, falling from a height on the girl lying below, and reflected the entire spectrum of his feelings and emotions, from curiosity to love, from admiration to tenderness. This moment of top-down observation created a magical aura of mystery and passion that gossiped them both into an invisible web of relationships and shared dreams. The girl who left scratches on David's skin was biting her lips in pleasure and coming out with desire that was reflected in her movements and moans. She couldn't hold back from screaming David's name, and the man, immersed in temptation, had no intention of stopping, deepening both of them in waves of pleasure. The girl threw her legs back, succumbing to the temptation that drove not only her crazy, but also the man who was ready to do anything to satisfy her needs. Both of them were already tired from the constant movement and emotional stress, but this only increased their desire for each other. David collapsed onto the bed, wrapping both arms above Melissa, expressing his undying passion and love for her. His gaze was stern, but at the same time filled with tenderness, which warmed Melissa's soul with its warmth. However, later this look changed to a very sweet kiss on the cheek, which indicated a well-spent day and boundless tenderness between them. David began to tickle Melissa, and the girl laughed to the whole house, trying to control the volume of her idleness, feeling a sea of joy from such a simple but such a pleasant feeling. At night, the girl again felt cramps in her legs. It was such an unusual feeling that she felt to such an extent for the first time. This time she was much more exhausted. She yelled at David to stop and not move. The man just stopped in silence and said, "Understood, Melissa," and then kissed her on the shoulder. Looking around the room, surprised to see their belongings strewn all over the floor, Melissa tried to comprehend the scale of the mess they had made. "By the way, looks like we're going to have a lot of cleaning to do. Just look at this mess we've made," she added as she began to scan the smile and joke-wet space. David, standing directly in front of the picture that Melissa was drawing secretly from him, felt an inner caring tremor that filled his heart with incessant questions and hopes. The man stood thoughtfully, not paying attention to the light of the picture for a long time, and when he heard footsteps approaching and felt Melissa's hand on his shoulder, he asked with a hint of impatience, "Don't you think you should explain something to me?" Piercing the space between them, a slightly tense question. The boy slowly approached the painting, intending to reveal the secrets immersed in the mystery of the canvas, which held him tightly in its arms, tempting him more and more with every moment, like a secluded and attractive depth into which he could plunge forever. Melissa, with her arms wrapped around her guarded painting, at least felt exposed, because she had nothing left to hide, so she just watched, waiting for David's reaction that would determine their future communication, trying to calm the insecurity that had been in her for too long. Her heart, and open the door to a new stage of their relationship. She willingly agreed to talk about the painting, its meaning, design, and the entire subtle context of her work, drawing attention to all the little things and details invisible at first glance, which were preserved in her memory like the most valuable treasure, revealing the secrets and nuances that made her work unique and inimitable, like Melissa herself. The Paris Salon, an annual exhibition that was first held in France, is considered an important event for world culture and art, as it defined the trends and directions of the development of fine arts throughout the centuries, creating a platform for creative interaction and exchange of ideas among prominent artists and cultural figures. At first, only members and students of the Academy of Arts had the right to exhibit their works there, but over time it became possible for a large number of artists. After the French Revolution, it was found that the salon was open only to a small number of high-ranking peasants. So the laureate of the Rome Prize got the opportunity to study in Rome and the chance to influence the plan of French art at a time when there were no proper means of advertising. The exhibition of the Paris Salon became a gateway to a dream and an important annual event for every artist. David asked, "So what do you mean you're going to exhibit this painting at the upcoming French exhibition like this? Hide from everyone?" Melissa only gave a short, "Yes, shut up." She spoke clearly and confidently, as if she had rehearsed her speech countless times. Melissa also decided to add certain sentences, namely, "By the way, I heard that due to certain circumstances, one great place in the salon will be free. If we hang the picture there, it will no doubt cause a stir among the visitors." David thought about the girl's words. It seemed that he was interested in it. David said quietly, "I'm not trying to dissuade you. I'm asking because it's interesting. But should the picture be of a naked man? In order to get good reviews from viewers and critics, it is worth hanging something a little out of the ordinary." David continued, "For example, something like Jews, if you use Artesia Gentilexia paintings as a source, you can get a lot of good feedback towards your work." Melissa replied, the picture would definitely have an incredible story." In her mind, Melissa said, However, I want men, or to be more precise, I want you. I want to express my love for beauty in pictures. Melissa continued. I mean, the beauty of the male body. She seemed to sing the moment. It was so sweet that David didn't want it to end. He asked Melissa, in your eyes and picture, do you find me attractive? His bitterness and sad notes of regret quoted this phrase as the maximum stern lesson of a girl's milking. He continued, but aren't you then like all artists who only pursue beauty? Melissa, it is not a desire to express love, but simply an object of your worship. For some reason, only now did the girl think about what she could have done wrong in her life and take David's words to heart. When the boy tried to kiss her, Melissa turned away and said, well, David, you're right. She stood in front of her husband and said, I don't intend to become the most famous artist. I don't seek fame and popularity, but I want to shock the audience to the core. She continued quietly, I know most people are against unfamiliar things, but I know they want something awesome. So, at this point yesterday, she paused a little as if preparing David for something really crazy. She looked straight into David's soul, as if trying to convey to him the words, our picture will definitely be successful, David. However, his look changed to a strange surprise and rather a pleasant shock. It was not the word picture that was spinning in his head, but the very word our did Melissa consider their duet as one whole? His face was clearly blushing. He looked away as if trying to hide his thoughts from everyone. David extended his hand to the girl. He knew how to help her, so he didn't think about what it might cost him. He looked at Melissa right in her green, like spring greens when the first sun shines. Her gaze was truly charming and alluring. So David said without argument, I see what you mean. I know one person who works shifts as a guard at the palace, so I think I can help you hang the painting in the center of attention. The girl was sincerely happy. This moment could be considered one of her dreams, but she could not even think that she would be able to realize this dream so quickly. She held out her hand to the man as a sign of reconciliation and thanks for his future help. However, she did not have time to say thank you when she heard someone shout her name through the door. Everyone turned their heads in anticipation of the guest. Two men entered the room, a respectable blonde man in a hat and what appeared to be his assistant. The man solemnly walked down the corridor and examined everything from head to toe. From this look, Melissa felt terrible. She heard the boy's voice and immediately understood who was walking down the corridor. David quickly covered himself with Melissa's clothes. He looked at her guests and realized that Melissa was definitely hiding something. However, while he was here, the only thing he could do was listen and observe, because meddling in her affairs would definitely not be the best decision. Melissa slipped across the room to the door, the bottom of her stomach sinking, but she suppressed a curve of resentment and put on a blind smile. Opening the door, Melissa looked at her husband and said, Hi, Dad, I'm so glad to see you. However, her face immediately changed to anger and disgust when she saw Philip next to her father. She said, Oh, Philip, you came here too, Father. Why did you take this boy with you? This Philip turned out to be the son of Marquis Stanley. Philip was the second son in the Stanley family, and also Melissa's fiancé from whom she tried to run away. The boy took off his hat and smiled pleasantly, his smile causing even more disgust and disgust to appear on Melissa's face. As a good landlady, Melissa invited her unexpected guests into the room. Melissa placed several cups on the table, poured tea into them, and placed the tea set on the side for convenience. At first, the conversation went on in calm tones. No one shouted. But suddenly, the father brought up the topic that Melissa is already an adult and she should get married, because time is running out and years are not eternal. But the girl was very angry at this proposal. She angrily banged on the table, almost knocking over the teacup in her lap, and shouted, I've told you many thousands and hundreds of times that I will never marry anyone. She looked at the most calm father. This calm look angered the girl even more. His indifference to any screams awakened even more screams in Melissa. She got up from her seat and said, Lord Father, can you imagine how hard it was for me to run away from you? Suddenly, calmly, her father's voice echoed around the room. Melissa looked up at her father, trying to calm her inner disappointment. Dad spoke slowly, barely perceptibly, but clearly, and so that Melissa could hear him well. Lissa, as a father, I have no idea what's on your mind at all. Melissa was somewhat confused. She thought that she had offended her father with her sharp refusal and insult. She tried to find words that could help her atone for her guilt, but she couldn't find them. Philip interrupted the girl and said, Duke, I'm sorry. Can we talk to Melissa alone? I have a conversation for her. Melissa's father exhaled and said, "Yes, Philip, of course." He slowly walked up to Melissa and took her shoulder. He asked her to go with him to another room so they could talk. David just continued to hide behind Melissa's large racks of clothes. Lucky for him, she had a lot of dresses, and dresses with long sleeves, so they covered the tall guy well. David began to think in his temporary hiding place, and it was he who said to himself, "Who is this? Philip? Who is he? Maybe if Melissa asked me to hide here, it could be someone from her family?" David moved closer to the door to hear what Philip and Melissa would say. One way or another, he would be ready to protect Melissa. Melissa didn't know what to say to Philippe. When they got out there was such an awkward pause between them that Melissa interrupted with the words, "I have nothing to tell you, Philippe. I'll be staying in Paris anyway." After lighting one cigarette from his pocket, the young man smiled. He had his trump cards up his sleeve, and the girl quickly put them up, saying, "Melissa, do you want to hang your picture in the salon at that exhibition in Paris?" The girl almost fell, because she thought that she had never told anyone about the fact that she wanted to do this. Philip said, "Lissa, you've been talking about this since childhood. It won't be difficult to guess, so let me be honest with you. Marry me." Melissa stood in shock, but was about to say something when Philip interrupted her and said, "I will help hang your painting in the exhibition. People will see your creation." Continuing to smoke a cigarette, Philip exhaled smoke and said, "The main critic of the salon is a close friend of my father, so it will not be difficult to agree on your painting." Philip continued, "Even if we marry you, I will not stop you from creating. I will not forbid you to make pictures and draw what you want, because I like your creation. I like what you do, Liso." David, sitting between the curtain of several dozen dresses, looked at the girl and her conversation partner, trying to understand what they were talking about, because they were speaking English, so David could not understand a word. However, despite the fact that the man did not say anything at all, he continued to listen and analyze emotions. Philip continued to say, "I am interested in how, in a creative personality, you can consider me your guarantor." Melissa replies, "Stupid enough to glue. What do you even know about my art world?" However, Philip calmly took another drag of his cigarette and said, "Well, it's an honor to meet him. I wasn't honored." Philip continued, "All the time you ran away alone, stubbornly kept afloat, wanted to share with someone your creativity, a part of your soul and moral state. You didn't even try to explain it to the people closest to you. So this is your world of art?" Melissa swallowed a big ball of pity and shame. She didn't want to stand next to this man. She saw in his work something more profound and invaluable to a person like Philip, but she didn't want to argue with him. Instead, she ordered clearly and succinctly, as if she understood all of Philip's words, "Get out of here now." Philip didn't understand. He wasn't going anywhere, so he wanted to talk some more. Calling Melissa's name again, she yelled, "I told you to go away!" However, the man did not listen again. He spoke, "Let's go to Japan on our honeymoon. You said you wanted to see ukiyo-e. This genre of engraving was quite popular there." Melissa stood silently for a while facing Philip. She tried to find words that could describe her flying storm in her heart. She was engaged to one and loved a completely different one. But did she love David as she describes? And was she ready to leave everything she had for him? Without continuing the conversation, Philip left. He politely said goodbye and closed the door, and Melissa remained standing in the same place. Only when she was sure that the door was closed, she turned and called David. The man indifferently went out to the girl. He looked at the floor and later turned his gaze to her. There was indifference in his eyes, but only Melissa could see anxiety and worry for her. David was standing in front of the girl with his hands on her shoulders. He was twice her height, so he asked, "Melissa, are you okay? Who were those guys?" Melissa stood in silence for a while, unable to pick up any seeds. She wanted to hug David and just stand in his arms, but she couldn't. The girl tightly clenched her hands into fists and looked at David without showing any emotion. In as cold a tone as possible, she replied, He's my fiancé." Something in David's heart sank. He seemed to feel that he was losing someone important. Both of them did not show their feelings, but David asked, "Melissa, are you engaged to your husband?" The girl could not stand it. Every time she was reminded that she was engaged, her blood boiled in her veins. Melissa shouted, "My father chose this guy when I was still a child. I have no intention or desire to marry this stupid boy. I don't even love him." Speaking out, Melissa realized what mistake she might have made. David put his hand to his forehead and grunted. Then, after a second's pause, he said, "Even if that's the case, even if he's your fiancé, you had to tell me about it, didn't you?" Looking at Melissa, he continued, "No, right now, tell me everything, right now. What's going on?" Melissa's innocent look made the man feel embarrassed for looking at Melissa so angrily, so he silently waited for an explanation. After several hours of talking, David said, "I was expecting something like this, but..." He turned to Melissa, who was covering her mouth with her hand in exhaustion, and said, "Did you really run away from home, to another country, with your father's money?" He continued, "And your so-called fiancé, if he can be called that, came all this way to say all those words?" Melissa wrapped her head in her hands, but she didn't want to feel all that shame on herself. The girl started to cry. She felt so depressed and said through her tears, "But he wasn't right at all either, wasn't he?" Melissa continued, When my father asked me what I wanted to do, I couldn't answer, and the look on his face when he looked at me was like he was about to cry." Melissa still remembered her father's face at that moment. She was so overwhelmed she couldn't describe it. Realizing that Melissa is opening her soul to the boy again, she did not hold back. So she said that I will exhibit a painting at the exhibition, which I would not hesitate to show even to my own father. Will I even be able to achieve my goal? Why am I so selfish? Melissa started sobbing. Her hands were shaking and her face was red with tears. Melissa screamed, "Why am I always creating trouble and trouble for everyone around me when everything in my life has gone wrong?" David just listened in silence to a depressed Melissa who couldn't cope with her problems. He put his arm around the girl's shoulder to encourage her and give her the opportunity to feel safe and in a place where she can talk. David muttered, "Since Mother's Day or so, you've been doing great up until now." Trying to encourage, David said, "So this behavior isn't normal. Don't suffer alone. Why don't you just talk to your father?" Another tear rolled down the girl's face again. She closed her eyes and said, "David, you are so kind, but now I want to think about it alone." She slowly let go of the boy's hand, signaling him to leave her. Looking at Melissa for the last time, the boy became sad. His face showed pity and sympathy for Melissa. He didn't know how to help her, but he could do what she asked him to do. Days fly by. Thoughts about Melissa did not leave my head, and thoughts were blocked that day. Everything seemed to be in place, and David seemed to be at home, but so restless in his soul, so damp and dim without Melissa and her bright ray of light. David yelled at himself, "I should have stayed and calmed Melissa down. Everything she said, I just got to know her a little better than before." The gaze was directed somewhere at the door, but only she was in his head. Meanwhile, Melissa suffered quietly in her room. She also wanted to deal with everything, because she understood that she should do it herself and not with the help of someone. Later, she raised her head to look ahead. From time to time, she looked at her picture, but immediately looked down and began to cry. Melissa did not cry this time. She just stopped looking at David's naked body, trying to see the details of the picture. She walked over to the painting and ran her hand over the canvas, thinking to herself, "Should I be more stubborn? And insist that I stay in Paris in the future? Anyway, I didn't sit idly in the room, so if my painting causes such a stir, my father will see the result of my efforts and trust me." The girl continued waving her hands and saying, "Escape to France was not really an escape, rather a desire, and following my dream. Yes, to be honest, I really considered this plan too risky and dangerous, but what has it led me to, and what can bring?" Melissa desperately wanted to stay with David, but she didn't know if her father would approve. And if not, she will return to Paris and never be able to see him again. Of course, Melissa's dreams were in the first place. She was ready to follow them even to the other end of the world. But her father constantly restrained the girl from too crazy actions and thoughts. Maybe he just cared about his daughter, or maybe he was too paranoid to not trust her. Anyway, Melissa was determined. Now she had to at least try to get her parents' permission. If she couldn't, she would know that even if she tried, it was better than sitting in her room crying in front of a picture that Melissa could never to lay out. She went to the mirror, looked at herself, and with confidence in her head and a firm rod said, "It's time to end this farce. It had to stop sometime, and I will stop it." Melissa coquettishly adjusted her corset and headed for the exit. A confident look and a loud knocking of heels gave Melissa even more confidence, so the girl no longer doubted herself. Meanwhile, David was sitting with his brother and sister. He came into the room and asked, "Chloe, I'm home. How are you doing with your studies?" Chloe turned at her brother's voice and smiled faintly. Afterward, she stopped playing the piano and replied, "Ah, brother, is it you? "Have you been spending all these days with Sister Melissa?" David answered, "Melissa has some things to do, so she's resting for now. Or rather, she's not resting but working." Chloe replied, "She spent all these days with you. Oh, by the way, I saw her recently." David was surprised and almost threw his younger brother to the ground, weakening his arms. It was raining terribly outside. It was pouring like a bucket, but David was not stopped by it. David ran splashing puddles everywhere, his feet wet and soaked. David remembered Chloe's words. "Sister Melissa got into a carriage with some rich man." Chloe continued, "I think they went towards the station." David ran as fast as he could, wanting to get to Melissa faster than she could get on the train. The guy didn't care if Melissa was engaged or not. The only thing he wanted was to see her. Even if he couldn't be her muse anymore, it didn't matter at all. With all the last of his strength, David kept running, the rain both helping and hindering him, cooling his body and falling down his face and hands. Melissa put one hand forward, trying to catch the raindrops that flew so quickly through her open fingers, and some bounced off the palm, leaving a wet trail behind. Melissa looked up at the mountain Philip was talking with a strange man. He said, "They say the train will be late due to a heavy downpour." This news partly made Melissa happy, because she understood that she could stay here for the last time in Paris, to which she would probably never return. Philip continued, "It's quite a long way to our destination, so what do we do now?" "I told you that you should have left earlier." The stranger replied, "Sorry, sir, there has to be some other way." But Philip had already turned to Melissa and was only paying attention to her. Suddenly, a very loud scream was heard behind her. It was drowned out by the loud sound of rain, but Melissa caught the echo of her name even on the platform. Suddenly, she turned around in a panic, realizing whose voice she had just heard. Her lips trembled, and her hands tried to find her pockets to stuff them there. Yes, David was standing at the edge of the street. He was wet, cold, and very hungry. But he completely ignored all these factors. He saw only Melissa in front of him. Only to her, he wanted to run with all his legs and through the rain and showers to shout her name. David raised his head, and Melissa met his eyes. They were so familiar, and as if they had known each other all their lives. David shouted, "I don't understand you. If you speak English." He yelled it again through the rain, the loud thump blocking his face in full view, but Melissa could clearly see his silhouette, his strong arms, his strong body wrapped around his wet shirt, his teary eyes, which he tried hard to hide. David headed forward, confidently and clearly. He walked towards Melissa without stopping and speaking in French. "You're an idiot who raises his voice to get angry." He continued to speak, but confidently looked at his feet and at Melissa, as if trying to see the motivation of his steps. Philip blocked the girl. He stood in front of her, but David continued to say, "Also, I'm not the kind of gentleman who can take you to Japan to look at your favorite books." He said this with such sincerity and sadness in his eyes. His tone was subdued, but outwardly he tried not to show it. Melissa was standing behind Philip, as if she was afraid of what might happen next, but the tears on her face stood out and collapsed into a big drop of tears, which began to slide down the girl's cheeks little by little, leaving no hope in her heart. David spread his arms and shouted, But there's one thing I'm sure of. I love you more than anything in the world, Melissa." Tears streamed down his face, and he quietly added, "And our picture is sure to be a success." He said it quietly, but Melissa seemed to read his lips. She understood what David said. She understood that he was the same. Rivers of tears also flowed down Melissa's face. The girl was so worried by these words. So strongly they touched her soul, the same part of the soul that was closed for so many years, which Melissa did not show to anyone and hid all these years. The girl stood still for a few seconds, but later she put her foot forward, and Philip, trying to grab her, only grabbed her hat. The hat flew back, but the girl didn't mind Philip shouting, "Melissa, please don't marry him." The man only allowed the girl to run to whomever she wanted. She had her own dream, and she ran to it. Wrapping her arms tightly around his neck, she clung to him with her whole body, feeling the cold raindrops that gradually seeped through her dress. She laughed right in his face. Now she was truly happy, without any context, without any obligations. She pressed her husband to her, and then she kissed passionately, allowing the rain to wrap them in her arms. Their bodies were drenched to the thread. Tight-fitting clothes were glued to one hole, but the passion of happiness and the very moments that they would live together burned between them. Love was the same feeling that Melissa felt for the first time for so many years. Philip and father were walking on the platform, and Melissa was walking in front of them. She walked confidently towards her father and quickly smiled weakly when she was next to him. Seeing her father's face, Melissa wanted to cry. She saw his wrinkles, but now her father was a really important person, and Philip was just an additional character in this game, who was kicked out with great shame. Melissa ran up to her father and said, "Father, I want to stay in Paris, please let me." She took his gloved hand and said, "For the first time in my life, I found something I really want to do, and it's not Daddy's empty words, really." The father smiled. It seems that he was also sincerely happy for his daughter, who was burning with the desire to draw and lived with the art that only she knew. Melissa was dripping with raindrops and saying, "You won't be disappointed in me, I promise. I'm sorry for throwing all these problems and promises at you so suddenly." She begged her father to give her one more chance, one more time to trust her, and one more time to allow her to have a good future and to realize her dreams. Her words sounded so convincing and pleading, as if Melissa was ready to do anything for this chance. Father suddenly remembered the past, remembered one of the moments when Melissa was also standing next to him. It was very warm outside, but clear days covered the estate. A woman's voice addressed the Duke. "Oscar, can you believe this? Our daughter drew a picture." Melissa's mother was still alive and healthy. She was happy about the little things and appreciated every moment of her life. So she looked at her daughter's picture and showed it to everyone all the time. Oscar remembered his wife's words while looking at his daughter. "We will not know what she drew in this picture, but I am sure of one thing. When Melissa grows up, she will definitely be full of surprises and interesting events." Closing his eyes as if shutting out the past, Oscar breathed in and out without saying anything. Moments of a clear day and greenery overhead flashed back in his memory. A few clouds in the sky only hinted at the coming rain, but today they were snow-white. Oscar ran his fingers along the brim of his hat as if adjusting it. He looked at Melissa and said, "I have enough. Right, so I'm going back to England. Wait for a letter from me, dear." Melissa kissed her father on the cheek as if to ward him off from all evil and said, "Be careful." Oscar smiled and replied, "I'll be back with the onset of winter, and we'll talk to you then." Suddenly, Oscar turned his attention to David, standing not far from Melissa. Hearing his name, David immediately raised his head. Oscar turned to David with the words, "You too. I still don't approve of your relationship." David's face showed indifference and complete disregard for Melissa's problems and her father's requests. Oscar continued, "Melissa got permission to stay in Paris because the water wants to paint. And if you even touch my precious daughter with a finger, I will not stay away. You heard me." Melissa laughed because she knew that the father could not understand his own daughter. The train had already left, and Oscar entered it without hesitation. The girl was standing on the edge of the platform and looked like her father in the thin corridor of the train. The man handed over his luggage and walked to the edge of the exit to hand something to Melissa. He was silent for a while and then broke the pause with the words, "Always know that I love you." Melissa was shocked by such words from her father. It seems that for the first time in a long time, she heard sincerity and polite attitude towards her interest in them. However, the girl was happy. She turned to her father and raised her head and said, "I am your father too." It's been a long time since that day. Melissa and David got together somewhere. Or rather, David asked Melissa to get dressed and go with him. David carried Melissa in his arms and said, "Just a little bit more. We've got a little bit left." After a few steps, David turned his head and said, "Here we come." The man slowly lowered Melissa to her feet, and the girl calmly walked around, the place where David had brought her. Melissa's shock was beyond words. The beauty around her was breathtaking. The girl could only utter "wow" and continued to look at the sky, remembering more and more all the moments spent with David. She was truly happy, and probably staying in Paris was one of her best decisions. David leaned on the windowsill and said, "Pretty little, isn't it? I come here from time to time to be alone." Melissa asked, "But David, how did you find the entrance here?" The man braggadociously answered, "There is no place in Paris like that." "Didn't know." Suddenly, the guy took the girl by the hand. This movement was so familiar and pleasant that Melissa was embarrassed to feel how red she was with shame. David just looked at the sky and enjoyed the moment and the bright colors in the sky that flowed from one to another. Suddenly, Melissa started talking about the time when David ran up to her and shouted to the whole street that he loved her and so on. But David interrupted the girl and asked, "Do we really need to talk about this right now, Melissa?" The girl smiled, and suddenly David said, "You know, I want to tell you something. He took a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a bright gold ring with it. David, like all respectable gentlemen, got down on one knee and patiently began his speech. Looking at the girl, he said, "Melissa, will you come out on me?" David got up from his knee and said, Yeah, I know it sounds pretty funny, but everything I said before was true." Melissa looked at David and asked, "What in the world? Do you love me more than anything?" Looking around, Melissa smiled once more. She was enjoying the scenery around her, and just enjoying every moment. She was a copy of her mother. In shock, Melissa cupped her red cheeks with her hands, tears streaming down her face. David did not understand what was happening, why Melissa was crying. Did he do something? The guy ran up to the girl and saw how her lips began to tremble as if from the cold or excitement. Sweat began to run down his face. And a second later, Melissa shouted, "I agree!" Out of excitement, David did not immediately understand what Melissa said to him, but Melissa repeated again, "I agree, David." She laughed at his reaction and continued, "We're going to Japan with you on our honeymoon, and I want 10 kids." David laughed. He was really happy because he found someone like Melissa. The boy approached the girl and hugged her and later said, "Think carefully about 10 children." Melissa had plenty of time now.